Yep.
Perfect. Give it a second to propagate. Right. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So we have Skip, and I think this conversation for anyone that's really looking into marketing, advertising, and just really kind of understanding where we are in today's world, in today's market with technology and everything else, this is going to be a hell of an episode for you to listen to. So, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing a particular name. So this guy's name is going to be the dynamic response ad boss, which kind of goes hand in hand with my first question right off bat. But I want you to kind of tell the audience a little bit more about you and what would you like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a huge like entrepreneur nerd and advertising nerd. So I'm down to talk about a bunch of things, but definitely my passion or the thing that at least I know the most about is marketing and advertising things. And that wasn't my original passion. I sort of have been a reluctant advertising guy the whole time. That when I was 16, I did it to try to impress a girl, who's now my wife, by the way. So it worked. And, I wanted to get a job as a writer, and that was the only jobs that were available. And then that morphed into web design, and then that morphed into doing some pretty high level freelancing, and then led to an actual position with Time Warner, and then over to Clear Channel Radio, and they were building out their whole new department and all of that, and they became the digital arm, all of those things. But at almost each stage of the career, I kept thinking like, oh, I want to be a journalist, or I want to do this, but those doors weren't open, and then the marketing thing always was. So yeah, but eventually eventually you develop a passion for it. You start to realize like, wait a second, this is actually, once you get a few clients or a few folks that that you've had a positive impact with them, I think you can get passionate about anything.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So, kind of going back to what I was alluding to, kind of calling you the dynamic, responsive ad boss. I mean, those first three are part of your acronym for your company name of
Yeah.
draft. So, I want you to kind of talk about that. I mean, obviously, coming up with an acronym, coming up with the name, playing off of the terminology of draft. Like, what was the concept going into that? And do you mind completing the acronym for us?
Yeah, no. So Draft Ad Tech was our original name of our company, and we're now Draft Media Partners just because of mergers, acquisitions, and things. But Draft Ad Tech, the original idea was our dynamic response advertising forecast technology, and which I know is a mouthful. But then the marketer in me realized that that's DRAFT, and so that's sort of how we backed into that. But the idea of having, first of all, most advertising, paid ads, is in some form or fashion all about a specific response. We define advertising as a specific message to a specific audience to get a specific result. So usually that's whether that's lead gen for a roofer or sales for an e-commerce platform, or we work with the state of North Carolina on anti-smoking campaign, and it's getting people to sign up for anti-smoking, right? So whatever that end result is, even if it is just awareness or getting the message out there, knowing ahead of time the best way to get that response was like that was my passion. I met with my I had a meeting with my this is now for almost 5 years ago, and I had a meeting with my financial advisor, and he laid out three different plans, and he was basically saying, if you go with this plan, you're going to get probably around a 7% return. If you go with this plan, you're going to get that, and so forth. And it always, that sort of stuck with me as like, why can't we do that in the advertising world? Because we always say advertising is an investment, right? Or paid media is an investment. But then when a client would ask, hey, if I give you $1 million, what can I get in return? It was always like, like I don't know, probably around this. And so, which bothered me because it is an objective thing, right? Like we know a display ad should have, a whatever about a 0.1% click-through rate, or a landing page should be converting at 5%, or radio response from terrestrial radio should be 1% of the cume. And it's like, like all of those things are like objective things. There just
Mm.
wasn't anything that put it all into one place. And so that's what we did.
Hmm. I think it's definitely interesting. I mean, you brought up to say the $1 million. Now, like the general rule of thumb that I've heard dozens of times, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm right or heading in the right direction. For every dollar you spend, you should at least break even, right? I mean, that's the goal. So obviously, anything surplus that will put you into the black. So, like, what kind of ratios are you generally talking about if, to say, you were hypothetically putting $1 million into the actual advertising market?
So we have a rule that we turn down clients or say no to a campaign that is below a 3 times predicted ROAS. So if we put it in the system and it's forecasting a break even or loss for the whole campaign. Now, sometimes you're doing it strategically. So,
Mm,
for example, sometimes you're breaking even on your 999 book campaign because you're really trying to sell the $2,000 course behind it or
mhm,
something like that. So you might intentionally or strategically break even on a piece of the campaign, but
mm,
for the most part, when you look at a big picture, if it's less than a 3 times predicted ROAS,
mm,
there's no point in doing it because that's why bother. And it usually takes 3 months before things get up to the 50th percentile. So
mm,
that's right at that break even point.
mm,
And so that's sort of our rule. Now that said, our average is actually closer to 8 times ROAS, but a lot of those are very mature, very healthy, happy campaigns, right? So that they don't always start out that way. But if it's not even predicting a 3 times ROAS,
mm.
do something else. Put your money in something. Put it in an index fund or something.
Got you. So, I mean, obviously, I think we've both been into marketing for a period of time. And then one time on Facebook, the general rule of thumb was a $5 ad spend to kind of test your demographic, test your market, test your like your direct ad key terminology, and then
Yeah.
actually increase your budget after that. Does that still hold as a rule of thumb, or things have changed?
Yeah, no, that's my favorite. I mean, that to me is the
Mm,
smartest way to get market research because
mm,
we now because we started out our original business plan was to be a SaaS, like to be a software as a service. We built this platform for ad agencies and fractional CMOs and those types of things, and we thought, well, we'll charge them to be a part of our system, and we'll do with the planning piece and all that.
mm,
And then almost by request of them saying, hey, thanks, you built this plan, now just do it. We realized, oh, that's the bigger opportunity. And the reason I say that is because um, to like a lot of times we're working behind the scenes of like 80% of our business is behind the scenes of another ad agency or company.
mm,
And there's nothing that breaks my heart more than when I see that someone has spent like 20 grand in market research or, some crazy number like that because I'm like, you could have done that, yeah, with a few $100 in paid ads. Just test different campaign, test 5 different headlines, test 5 different visuals, and there's your market research, and it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot more accurate because things like focus groups and those things are just notoriously bad advice. Like
mm,
the feedback you get just oftentimes doesn't mirror or match the market.
mm,
There's a reason why we see that like Pepsi campaign or whatever that's like, how did they not like see the problem with this thing? And it's because they paid some focus group instead of running it in one market at a small test and then
mm.
getting like real world feedback.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think that brought up a real good terminology that I think anyone that's going into advertising or going into marketing, they kind of have to understand and comprehend it. And I would think that you guys do this very well, A/B testing. So I mean, like what percentage of what you're doing? Because I mean, prime example, let's say you have this $1 million ad spend, and let's say it's for an ad agency. Let's say you're working as a white label behind them, like
Yep.
obviously trying to figure those things out can be very difficult without knowing the exact demographic of the audience. So how does A/B testing fall into what you're doing?
So we not only A/B test the different creative. First of all, A/B testing should be a big part of everything. There's, I think everyone has heard, hey, a marketing campaign just takes time,
Mm,
but the reason is that like it's not because it's just something magical happens at like the 6 week mark or something like
mm,
that. It's because you should be in weeks one and two, really 1 through 3, you should be testing a bunch of variations of the ad, even a bunch of variations of the audience. I'm a big proponent too of A/B testing the target as well.
mm,
Um, because we always think, usually when we think of A/B testing, you're thinking of the creative, which you should be doing for sure,
mm,
but you should also A/B test the target audience. And because sometimes you can get the same type of audience for half the price at, by saying, I don't know, business owners over here and then saying likes Entrepreneur Magazine over here. Well, it's like the same type of audience.
Mhm.
Sometimes one is a lot cheaper than the other. And um, so A/B testing those things, and that's why a campaign should get better after the second or third week, because then you figure out, okay, this is the headline that works, this is the image that works,
Mhm.
this is the audience that's resonating. Then you start optimizing towards that. So it's not by anytime you ever have someone say like, oh, well, you gotta let it ride or something like that for 3 months. If you're letting the same campaign ride for 3 months, you're gonna get the same results for 3 months. It needs to be constantly tested. It is true that sometimes it can take 3 months, but it should be 3 months of testing and tweaking and making changes along the way.
So I think earlier, the reason why I led you down A/B testing is kind of like a little sense of humor at the end of this secondary question. It was like,
Yeah.
well, you said at 16 you were a copywriter and you were writing copy, and because of that copy is the reason why you ended up with the person that you're with right now. So
Yeah.
kind of, did you do A/B testing? Like, did you test that out before you actually presented it to your wife?
So that's actually hilarious because I am I'm a pretty much a social nerd, and I grew up more or less alone. My single mom, parents divorced, mom worked all the time, so I was the definition of a latchkey kid. So I was just always alone, and we were also incredibly poor. And I lived by the library,
Mm,
and I would always walk to the library because I'm old. That was the only place you could get internet. That was the only place you could, get books and stuff. So I was constantly at the library, and I actually got several books because, like any 16-year-old boy, the thing I was most concerned about was dating, right?
mhm,
So I actually like did a deep dive into even how, conversation starters. I would script out conversations to have. I would script out, like what the first date should include, how it should always be something lighthearted at the beginning
mhm,
that doesn't require a lot of talking, something like putt putt or something like that. Then dinner where you can do a little bit more deep dive,
mhm,
and then something a little bit more, like coffee or something like that right after it. And so I had this very strategic system for, um, quote, attracting a mate, and it worked, man. That's so I didn't quite do A/B testing because she's the only person I ever dated, but it's a 100% success rate. I'll put it that way.
mm, mm,
And then after our like after I think our third date, I made some reference to us getting married and going off to college together or something, and but I let it slip. I let my plan slip early, but because she
mm.
was like,
Oh,
but,
you didn't scare her off, right? So I mean, I
yeah,
like fast forward, a decade or so, you guys have
right,
3 kids right now. So I mean, like
exactly,
obviously 100% success rate plus a legacy to follow suit. So
exactly. So there is something to be said. If you can, if you're a nerd like me,
mm,
that
mm,
you can at least build out and structure conversations and just figure out the
mhm.
system and work towards that plan. It works in personal life and in business.
Mm. So I'm listening to you. You're saying your earlier days, you were going to the library. You're definitely a nerd. So it kind of leads me to like your draft mentality. And that's a particular byline that you have on a page on your website that's associated to your flywheel. So I definitely want to kind of talk about that. I mean, obviously, coming from the standpoint of you being a nerd, is that the general mentality, or what's the mentality to actually execute the drafts?
Yeah, I mean, the draft mentality really is, I mean, that's what the heart of A/B testing and things are. It's the idea that there is no failure, only feedback. So
Mm,
let's say that, you have this great plan, whether it's in personal life or in business life or an advertising campaign. When you launch it, you're going to get pretty immediate feedback. Either in the ad world, it's are they not responding to the ad? Whether it's radio, TV, or digital, doesn't matter. Are you getting less than the desired response rate or click rate?
mhm,
If so, that means you're either talking to the wrong audience or your ad stinks. And so then you make those changes and then you see what goes from there. Or if you're getting those initial clicks or those initial people to your site and you've looked and you've made sure that they're not spending like 2 seconds on your site or something that would imply it's bad traffic.
mhm,
As long as it's good traffic and it's not converting, that means your landing page stinks, right? And so you
mhm,
need to change that. And that approach works in an ad campaign, And it works in personal life where it's like, okay, hey, our Q3 revenue goal is
Mhm.
this. Here's our plan to do that. And if we're not getting the whatever it is, let's say appointments that we predicted, well, then we stink at setting appointments. So we need to focus in on that. That idea that there's always some sort of feedback loop and then making adjustments to your plan real time, then there's no way for failure, right? Like the
Mhm.
idea of a campaign failing is really impossible. You may have an ad that fails, or you may have a platform that's not the right fit, or something like that. But I mean, the idea of a whole, you know, 6 month, 1 year, whatever ad campaign failing, that's just laziness. That just means you didn't do the tracking and changing along the way.
Mm. I think that last word of laziness is a key component, and it was one of your examples that you did on another podcast, and you was talking about like the owner of the company was saying that I'm not getting any conversions, but come to find out because you were doing all the tracking, all the analytics, all the data that you could easily tell them like, well, we're sending you traffic, you're getting leads, but unfortunately your employees aren't answering the phone. So
Yeah.
how often does that really kind of happen in today's advertising and marketing world?
It happens a lot more than I would have guessed. It's definitely the minority like of campaigns. Like it doesn't happen. I mean, most campaigns,
Mhm.
most businesses do have at least an okay internal lead structure or something like that. But it ha- I would have assumed that something like that would never happen. Instead, it's like that's at least a conversation I have weekly with a business owner
Mhm.
is hey, either you're not answering the phone or your employees aren't answering the phone, or we had one. The most extreme example, I think, was this pharmaceutical. They're a pharmaceutical supply company. So let's say that I wanted to start Skip's Pharmacy. They're the folks that I would bring in to like stock my shelves and all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
one account to them is worth more than $1 million. But it's incredibly niche target audience. We did a campaign that generated 129 leads. And at the end of at our sort of recap meeting, I'm like, hey, what happened with those leads? They're like, oh, we haven't called them yet. And I'm thinking, that's just money that's just sitting there dying.
Yeah.
And it stinks because you don't know. I mean, those could have been 129 great leads. Those could have been 129 crappy leads. As a marketer, I need to know which it is because if it's bad leads, we need to tweak the target audience and all of that stuff. But
Mhm.
so yeah, it happens more than I would guess.
Mhm.
I mean, it happens a lot, actually.
Yeah. Would you think that it's potentially like a personality trait? I mean, obviously, again, like being marketers, I think that A/B testing kind of bleeds into our life, right? Variable data bleeds into our life. Systems, automation, like we talk
Yep.
about it, but we live and breathe and eat it. So you're talking about a standard owner, to say of like a service, like a roofing company. Their
Right.
minds are not fine tuned and dialed into that area of expertise. So, what have you done to kind of help them understand that? Obviously, you're getting leads, but you need to put some kind of system in place. Obviously with today's AI, it's almost as easy to kind of on board through an actual phone call with AI and streamline that 120 leads down to 20 leads. Have you had those conversations, and how to have those went?
Yeah, well, you're right that I think automation is the ultimate cure to those problems because it usually is somebody like a roofer who,
Mhm.
he or she's going to spend 2/3 of their week on a roof somewhere, right? So they're not thinking about, let me make sure I'm answering the phone and all those types of things. But yet, if I wake up one morning, I see a leak on my roof, I want that fixed that day, right?
Mhm.
And so it's hard to fix by just saying, hey, you need to do better.
Mhm.
Instead, there needs to be a system in place. And one way that we've tried to solve that is by trying to bring in solutions for each step of the funnel so that we can say, hey, looks like you need a chatbot or some sort of AI response. Here's that tool.
Mhm.
The other piece too is just by making each step objective, we're able to show, look, your ads are doing right. You're getting the right leads. These seem to be quality leads because when you do call back, they're converting.
Mhm.
Here's clearly the problem. And then there's just like no denying it. Then it's not like an opinion or, or something like that. So it's like, here's the problem. Here's 2 or 3 ways you can solve it.
Mhm.
And that usually helps. But automating stuff as much as possible, I think, is so important because everybody has bad days. Everybody has lazy
Mhm.
days. The more you can automate, the less those lazy days impact the business.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, I mean, I think through your level of automation, you've went through like multiple different growth strategies. I mean, earlier on, you were talking about, purchasing other companies or other softwares
Yeah,
and just looking at your hierarchy of your structure. I mean, you have ad tech, you have direct broadcast, creative, digital outdoor promotions and partners. So I want you to kind of break those down, not necessarily in sequence, but like where does each one kind of fit in? And obviously, I think each one is for a particular demographic, but I want to know
right.
the reason why that you would establish those as key structures underneath your umbrella.
It all comes back to really building with a specific target customer in mind, with us
Mm,
having agencies and fractional CMOs and things in mind as the folks that we're trying to make their life easier.
mm,
That's where we get the feedback of, okay, we had this great planning tool. That was the thing we launched with. And then we would get the feedback of, hey, I have to do these monthly reports. Is there anything you can do to help me make this case, if it's a fractional CMO, make this case to my CEO? And so we
mm,
started building out, all right, well, then let's have a dashboard that not only pulls in our campaign, which everybody does, but then let's also have a dashboard that pulls in things like their Google Analytics and their Google My Business pages, all these other things they might be doing that really aren't directly related to us.
mm,
Just because if we can make it so that they just got to wake up 15 minutes before that meeting with their CEO and just print out that report and walk in, then that
mm,
makes their life easier. And so, and then, we would get requests for, hey, do you guys do outdoor? And then we would, maybe stumble through the first order. And then it's like, okay, this is something that is a problem that we need to solve for. So let's do it. And so then we go all in on building out an outdoor solution
mm,
to the point where it becomes its own division. And really that's how we sort of started to branch out, is from that whole draft mentality of adjust based on the feedback you're receiving. So
mm,
people didn't like the SaaS model. So it's like, okay, we'll give that part away for free. Here's the tech part for free. We'll charge for the service side. And so, otherwise it would have been very easy to be like, well, that was a failure. Let's go out of business, right? Or this doesn't
yeah.
work. Instead, it's okay, that doesn't work. They want this. Let's do that. We're getting direct mail requests. Let's buy a direct mail company. We're getting, building for your customer and trying to solve as many of those problems as possible. That's the easiest source of innovation. I mean, using that roofer as that roofing example, that's where we had almost from the minute we built out our dashboard, we had the ability to record phone calls
Mm,
baked into it. And then to go in and score phone calls is like, this was a good lead. This is a bad lead. This is a good lead. But nobody was doing it. Like
mm,
they were doing that about as well as, like we already said, they're barely answering the phone. They're certainly not going on a dashboard and changing things. So we were able to bring in an AI that listens to the transcript of the phone call and then says, okay, this one they're talking about money, so that's a good lead. This one they're setting an appointment, so that's a good lead.
mm,
This one, they're talking about buying a house, so that's a bad roofing lead.
mm,
No to that one or whatever, so that we could get that feedback. Again, it's all about just listening to your audience, your customer base, and then solving as many of their problems as possible.
mm. So I think for you, I mean, your customer base has converted more into stakeholders. So when I saw this on your website, like I had like the hugest Kool-Aid smile when I saw the terminology about stakeholder capitalism. So I want
Yeah.
you to kind of talk about that and break that down, because that's not usually a terminology that you would hear in an advertising space. So I want to know, why did you go that route, and then what are the three core stakeholders?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea of we wanted to not just build a company that is good for like shareholder. Usually when you think of a business, you think in terms of the shareholders, the people that own the business, right? We really wanted to build something that is good for for the stakeholders. Stakeholders are a little different. It does include, of course, the owners of a business. There's a certain fiduciary responsibility to anyone that invests or as part of the leadership team. Like you need to be a good steward of those things.
Mm,
And then with that too, on the internal stakeholders side, is people like employees and those types of things, right? Like they're putting their family and their own livelihoods at risk to come and work for you, right? And come and do things. So you need to make sure that you're a good steward of your internal stakeholders, which
mm,
is owners and employees. That next sort of sphere of stakeholders is the folks that you directly interact with. So that would be like clients, customers, if that's part of why we will say no to a campaign if it doesn't look like it's going to generate a positive return on ad spend,
Mm,
because we're not in the business of just taking someone's money, right? It's bad business. For one, a 1 month order does nothing for us. Like we lose money on that, right? We don't make money until it's been running for years, and a bad campaign doesn't run for years.
mm,
But then also too, it's not the right thing to do. We would rather, my dad lost his business. And so it is a very real, the businesses are people. I always keep that in mind. So we have no intention of taking a business's money is no different than taking a person's money. We just don't do that.
mm,
So the people that we work with, and then also too, making sure we pay vendors on time and early, making sure that we pay, those folks that we directly interact with. And then the broader stakeholders outside of that. We want to make sure that we're paying our taxes. I think that's an important responsibility of any business. I know a lot of folks may disagree with me on that. I can certainly agree that our taxes maybe aren't spent great, but I do drive on the roads. I like, if my house is on fire, being able to call the fire department, whatever.
mm,
And so I think that's part of being a good steward being a good citizen. And then also, making sure that we're paying for, paying taxes, and then also paying for and making the community as a whole better.
mm,
I do believe that I have this sort of perhaps even maybe crazy belief that business solves like all the world's problems, right? Like
yeah.
I think all the time, like you would think of maybe like a war-torn country or something like that. I'm like, man, that wouldn't be going on if there was like a good economic safe structure in place
Mm,
with good systems and processes. And that's um and so yeah, so that's part of that, making a better world as a whole.
mm.
So that's
I think
that's what stakeholder capitalism is.
I think there's so much that we can kind of unpack and pull back the onions on that. And the first thing I want to dive in on what you said, and you brought up your dad. So, earlier on you were talking about like your upbringing, and obviously like you're alluding to you coming from an entrepreneurial background through your dad. Was that something that happened at an age to where mentally it scarred you to where now you're doing what you're doing because you didn't want to go down the same path that your dad did?
Yeah, I think that very much delayed. It's why I never really thought of entrepreneurship as a viable option. Honestly,
Mhm,
I thought of it as a wealth destroying tool instead of a wealth
mhm,
building tool.
mhm,
And just because I've seen that there is the other side to it as well. And I think that's part of why I started out wanting and working for, getting in with large companies and working my way up and thinking that that's the path, which that is a pathway to wealth.
mhm,
It's not. I would argue that that's actually a lot harder even than
mhm,
doing it on your own now. But I do think that's why I was so scared to make the leap.
mhm,
And then also too, I think it does give me a passion for the humanity of business. All the time, it's easy to think like, oh, if we do this or whatever. It's like, if let's say it's Amazon, it's like, let me, do I really care if I order the right size shirt? Let me just order these shirts because I can return these too. And yes, that hurts Amazon's bottom line, but they're an evil corporation anyway, so whatever. And like, no, there's, the people that own the stock in that company
mhm,
aren't. The people that own the stock in that company are like teachers, firefighters, all of those types of people. So
mhm,
that, so no, that is not a good thing to do. So I think it gave me a respect for the humanity behind businesses, and gave me a fear, both good and bad, made me terrified of debt. We've been a debt-free company, and perhaps even to our detriment. That's one of the things that we are considering now, is like what role we're at a point where
mhm,
potentially debt could play a strategic role for us. And but I just still don't want to do it just because I'm so debt averse, because I saw
mhm,
how that can also destroy businesses. So yeah, it comes with a lot of head trash and things, but it
mhm.
also, it comes with some of that's good though. Having a healthy respect and fear for the failure of business is not a bad thing.
Well, I mean, to your point, right? I mean, having the fear and overcoming that fear is the ultimate achievement for any entrepreneur. But for you, in the early days, you kind of tiered on that line a little bit. I mean, you made it as far up on the food chain as becoming a VP for iHeart Radio. So I want you to kind of like talk about that. Like, was that part of the fear kind of holding you back to a certain extent until you got to the point where you saying, okay, I've made it up pretty far. I have no choice but to move out of corporate America at this point and create my own sub world.
Yeah, because I mean, I was hired when there wasn't a division at all, and then really had to build out that division. And when I left, it was a $22 million division, and my pay stayed the same that whole time. And so I had this sort of thought in my mind of, oh, this is what success looks like. This is great.
Mhm.
All of those things. And everybody around me was sort of like, hey, why are you, why couldn't you do that on your own? Why couldn't you build that out, yourself? You got build something from the ground up. You should do it for
Mhm.
yourself. I just sort of ignored all of that because,
Mhm.
yeah, it was like I had this idea that it was safer working for a company. And it was
Mhm.
actually my brother who my brother's 10 years older than me. I have several brothers and sisters, actually.
Mhm.
Again, my family situation for as far as my immediate family and stuff. Not my household family. My house, my wife and kids, great. We're all very close. Everything's
Yeah.
great. But I mean, my family above me, everybody's all scattered out. We all barely know each other.
Mhm.
But my brother, who I didn't know that well at the time, I knew he was a business owner. So when I was considering going out on my own, I gave him a call and was like explaining my situation. Hey, I think I've got an opportunity here. I think I'm onto something big, but I don't want to necessarily take the risk. I'm scared to take the risk.
Mhm.
And he was like, well, he's the one that actually pointed out. He's like, well, he goes, what's the worst case scenario? And I'm like, well, I've got 5 or 6 people that I think could join more or less right off the bat. And he goes, well, right now your income's coming from one company. He's like, your income's about to come from 5 companies. He's like, you're in a lot more risk now than you will be. And I was like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. That was just like, that because he's exactly right. I mean, the idea of us losing a client, and we have some clients that are big enough to where if we were to lose them, it would severely hurt the business, right? But
Yeah.
we would have to lose several clients for us
Mhm.
to have to close up shop. And so that's much more secure position than, you know, showing up at a company that is constantly looking for layoffs and those things anyway, right?
Got it. Got it. So, reading some information about you on the internet, and I thought originally it was a typo, and I was like, well, I'm just going to ask you live on air to kind of confirm it was a typo or not. I saw in your description somewhere in there was something about a travel agency, like you've actually built or actually owned a travel agency, and everything we've been talking about has been tech related, has been marketing, been advertising. So where does the travel fit into this equation?
So that is my mostly my wife's business. I
Mhm.
am an owner too, but that is her that's mostly her thing. It was she was a at Clemson, she was a PRTM major, Parks Recreation Tourist
Mhm.
Management major. And she was a travel agent and working mostly in corporate travel uh, early on. And then when we had kids, we were in a position, thankfully, where she was able to just do that.
Mhm.
But then, our kids started getting older. She started wanting to do stuff again. And so that's where that came about. So we started up uh, Castle Secrets is it's a Disney specific travel agency,
Mhm.
and it's part of how we go to Disney World all the time because it's a lot cheaper for us than going anywhere else. For us to go to like the beach for a weekend costs us a lot more than going to Disney World.
Hmm. Hmm. It makes perfect sense. So, I mean, obviously, I think you and your wife, you kind of grew up in the business savviness thing together. I mean, you guys went from like 16-year-old teenagers to full-blooded married adults with kids. In that transition from being a kid to an adult, that's usually the hardest aspect of anyone's life besides going through a midlife crisis. How did you guys kind of deal with that, considering that, both different entrepreneurs, different paths, overlap, pros and cons, hurdles, overcoming stress, everything that comes with being an entrepreneur. How did you guys overcome that?
So we've been together now 20 years, and which is crazy. That's a long time. But that definitely was there definitely was a period of time. The hardest part was, I would say, 16 to 21 or so, where neither one of us, at that age, you're kind of changing what your long-term life goals are,
Mhm.
like almost on like a monthly basis, or at least we both were.
Yeah.
And so there were times where they were perfectly aligned and there were times where they weren't. But
Mhm.
because it was an ebb and flowing thing, the hey, I want to live here, you want to do this thing. I at one point had to move to Atlanta, and she was still living at Clemson, and which is not a terrible far thing, but I mean that's like two
Mhm.
and a half hours. And so there were definitely some stress points in there, but at the same time, we did both have the same overall goal. I mean, she very much, to her credit, was always more supportive of me. Like her kind of long-term plan was always to take that, and no judgment, it's not right or wrong, and like whatever, just for us, that was always her goal, was to be mostly focused on the family. And so once we sort of once that was sort of firmly established,
Mhm.
then we didn't have that, hey, I've got my career, I've got, and she like, I got my career, and the headbutting. It was always more of a focusing in on my career and my pursuits. And then her was more focused on kind of supplementing that and helping out with that. So
Mhm.
I think that definitely helped things a lot. Because otherwise it would be hard. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally hear where you're coming from with that, and it kind of leads me down the path to kind of talk about what we were hinted on earlier about general acquisitions, and that's also like another level of business that could be highly stressful, and how to organize the company structure. So I want you to kind of talk about like the company structure that you have right now. Is it more like an S corp, a C corp, a LLC? Like it's an umbrella or a holding company? Because obviously you have different facets of it. How do
yeah,
those things set up and stack up in your umbrella?
yeah, we're an S corp with an LLC. The I will say that that's the part that I'm the weakest on, because
Mhm,
that part's not my forte or my skill
mhm,
set. The next office over, Jerry, he's better at that. So I would say, if that's not your forte, one of the
mhm,
things I would recommend is finding a business partner who that is their forte. To Because those things can make a huge difference. But that is the from for most businesses, for most small businesses, from what I understand, or at least what I was sold on, is that S corp and LLC. The LLC protects you from, liability of the company is separated from the liability of the individual.
mhm,
And by being S corp, you can um, reduce your burden by not having by having meaning tax burden, by having things like salary and those types of things show up as expense, rather than it all being distributions, those types of things.
mm,
That's the that's my understanding of it anyway.
mm,
But the in terms of when we do like a merger or acquisition or those types of things, we always bring it under the we really want draft to be a full service in and of ourselves, and we're
mm,
we're very committed to having what I call a platform agnostic pricing model. In other words, I'm very I am like very passionate and dogged about making sure that we don't make more money from one product than another,
mhm,
because I think that makes us unable to be objective when we're making a recommendation to the client, or to our partners. So whether it's a billboard campaign, or a um, or a Facebook lead gen campaign, or whatever, our profit I want to have to be the exact same, so that we can make a truly objective recommendation for that customer. So
mm,
that's the piece that I always hold on to, because I really do want to keep a client focused thing. Because a lot of agencies, a lot of times, the reason that they're, and this is no knock to them, I understand it. You do have a fiduciary responsibility to your stakeholders as well, but a lot of them will make a recommendation because, you know they can make 10 grand of pure profit on video production, so they'll recommend
mm,
video for that reason, or something like that. For us, we wanted to make sure that it's always even keeled.
mm, mm. I think it's definitely fascinating, and you brought up a really solid keyword about being agnostic, and I'm taking that and jumping it in your services diversification, right? So 2020 being hindsight, considering that you have these branches, you have these umbrellas, and you're always working on them being equally yoked to each other or feeding into each other into an ecosystem. If you can go back in time and have an opportunity to shift a dynamic or change anything, and you have a 5-minute window to whisper something in a younger version of yourself's ear, what would that sound like? And what would you change?
I think I would have focused on. I waited too late to hire and train other folks. And that's the piece that if I had to do something different, I think business wise, that definitely would be it, because I think I hindered our growth. I mean, I've had, I mean, we're still very much in a growth mode as a company. So, I mean, it's still the 60, 70-hour weeks, right? But there was a time where it was all me pretty much. And it was all, and there's no reason for that, because there's people that are better at doing other tasks. Like there's, and so there's so not only is it, can I bring someone in that's better at that task? Like I hired a graphic designer. Well, she's way better at graphic design than I could ever hope to be, right? And those types of things. The more I was scared to do it because that has risk. I mean, that probably goes back to the dad thing, right? But the is that I'm scared, very risk averse. But sometimes risk averse is not it's not a good thing. It's somewhat a good thing. There's people way too far on the other end of the spectrum too. But uh, I waited, I think about almost a year longer than I should have to expand our team.
Mm, mm. I think it's definitely interesting that you went down the route of realizing that that's such, because obviously you're successful now, but to your point, it could have happened a lot earlier if you had did a little bit better on the delegation side.
Yeah.
So considering that, like, now you are the wiser, older version of yourself, if you can choose just 3 to 5 words, and again, I mean, I know you understand SEO, so we're drilling it down to just these keywords to define who you are. Which 3 to 5 words would you choose to use?
Me or the business?
You yourself.
I'm very one, I would say, is um, I do have a strong, let's just say, belief system that things will be okay and that everything works out. And a lot of what I do comes from that. I have a core faith, both in the world around me, and the fact that I do believe strongly that the things are okay, and I don't need to worry about the basics. I just need to worry about doing as good a job here while I'm here.
Mhm,
And so I don't know, what would that be? I guess faith is the one word.
mhm,
Yes for 5 words. I just gave like a paragraph, so sorry. And but the other one would be I do I think hard work, maybe to the point of I would say I have a fairly addictive personality,
mhm,
both in a good way and a bad way. I mean, like, thankfully, most of the time it's channeled in good ways. But there are times where I definitely see that I could have easily been an alcoholic or a drug addict or something like that. That same tendency could have been there. Thankfully, it wasn't. But I certainly understand it, because I do latch onto something and then just go all in on it. And so, um, addictive personality, it's just something to be aware of. Um, and then, I would say sort of my third keyword would be something like, I don't know, strategic. I mean, I do think that I do very much try to think before I speak, think before I act, think before I do things. That's all I got. 3 words.
So, like, let's just talk about that. I mean, obviously, you're talking about fate, you're talking about strategy, and you're talking about being addictive. Now, let's say there's a listener listening right now, right? And obviously, going back to your younger version of yourself when you were going to the library on a regular basis, from then until now, could you, like, think about books that have helped you to become who you are, that can actually help that person that may have those similar traits that you have?
Yeah. My number one advice would be to decide which mountaintop you want to start heading towards.
Mhm,
So pick your mountain, whatever that is, and start making steps towards it.
mhm,
Then, depending on what that is, find books, find as many books as possible related to that topic. There are several books I could recommend. It's certainly on entrepreneurship. I like, even though he himself is kind of a questionable person, but I like the Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I think is a great book.
mhm,
The there's the in terms of management, 1 Minute Manager. is I think probably one of the best books on managing people. There's Good to Great.
Mm,
I know that's kind of a classic. The E Myth as well. I think those in the business world are sort of core foundational things that everybody should have on their bookshelf, right? Those are the ones you
mm,
want to look at regularly. But whatever your thing is, do a lot of research and figuring out what the successful path forward is,
mm.
and then execute that plan and make adjustments accordingly. I really think that pretty much anybody can do pretty much anything by deciding what that thing is, second, building a plan for how to get there, and then third, just being relentless about doing that plan and adjusting it based on the feedback you receive.
Mm. Yeah, I think the way you answered that question was a duality to it. I mean, it's you definitely gave books, but you also gave some very insightful words of wisdom, right? So I want you to kind of like dial it even more because you're a tech junkie. I mean, that's kind of your addiction per se, right?
Yeah, one of
So
many.
so I want you to kind of itemize out like your top five in your tech stack that currently that you're using on a day-to-day basis right now outside of your given platform, that if you didn't have access to this particular software or this particular technology, you wouldn't be able to do what you do on a day-to-day basis.
The thing I geek out about the most, or the thing I mean, I truly am enjoying
Mm,
both ChatGPT and Gemini.
mm,
I know the like I've used both, especially building out custom GPTs and things. That is the thing that I'm doing just for fun. Like if I had to pick like a tech stack that I use in my free time, it's that. I'm not a big social media user or anything else, but I will think of something and then spend, an hour at night, like building that thing out as a custom GPT or something like that. So that's definitely one of them. I would also say Slack. Slack,
mm,
the ability just to communicate instantly with the team, send videos back and forth, those types of things. I'm dyslexic, so I don't. So being able to do quick videos and those types of things are one. I think it's a good way to build rapport, especially when most of our team is remote. Um,
mm.
we're a team of 10. There's only two of us here in our actual office. And so video is an easy way to build rapport and those things, but it's also great for somebody like me who struggles to read. So
Mm,
that it's part of why I recognize the value of books, by the way, too. Nothing like having to fight for that ability to
mm,
recognize how important it is.
mm. So to that listener that's listening that kind of falls in that category of who you once were and who you are right now, like how do they get in contact with you and where would you like them to kind of come into your funnel? Like ideally somebody that's brand new, first time hearing from you, loving what you're doing, and they want to take the next steps.
Yeah, well, from the business standpoint, we do have a chat. You can go to draftmediapartners.com or draftadvertising.com. Both will get you to the same place,
Mhm.
and we can build a media plan for you. No charge for our platform, any of that stuff. Um, we just take a percentage of it if you buy the campaign. But then I mean, also too, always feel free to email me as well. Skip at draftmediapartners.com or skip at draftadvertising.com.
Mhm.
Um, happy to answer questions and be a help.
Yeah, yeah. If I was a listener, I mean, I would definitely take you up on what you're suggesting. I mean, obviously having free access to your platform and ideally kind of seeing what that campaign could pretty much generate for them, and then actually then paying once they want to execute the actual campaign sounds like a win-win situation.
We try to do it that way. Yeah, exactly. We try to make it a no-brainer, because that is one of the biggest.
Mhm,
Usually, someone goes an entrepreneur when they start a paid ad campaign, they go into it. They either view it as like a necessary evil, like
mhm,
they either view it as just something they kind of have to do and they don't really want to do it,
mhm,
or they view it as some sort of like magic machine that's gonna, they've got no leads. If they put $1,000 in, they're gonna get a million leads.
mhm.
Both of those are very false and dangerous ideas. So yeah, I would suggest using that's part of why we built the planners, because it helps make it realistic. But if you're a roofing company, you're probably gonna be paying about $100 a lead to get an actual convertible lead.
Mhm.
All those different things.
Yeah. I think it's definitely something that's fruitful. And to your point about being addicted to AI, I mean, I was totally happy when I saw some of your videos and realized that you were using AI avatars. And I will say, like, that's where we are. We're not even going there. We're there now. So I would say companies are not utilizing those tools to their advantage. They're doing themselves a huge disservice. Now, being that you are a lover of that component, like, do you agree with what I just said?
Yes, I will say that one thing that we are changing is trying to move away from that to use more of like more of the human behind the company as well.
Mhm,
So it's like everything else in life.
mhm,
I think humans, we like tend to lean towards what there's a guy named Dr. Gosh, I can't think of his name. Dr. something. They came up with the idea, what he called nothing buttery, where
mhm,
nothing but this or nothing but that.
mhm,
And so I think AI is just one of those many things where we can fall towards nothing buttery, or
mhm,
we either use it too much or we are against it and don't use it at all. Both of those I think are bad things. I think we probably used it more than I would. Our website looks anonymous and looks behind. Some of that was strategic because
mhm,
I'm on a lot of calls representing whatever agency I'm with, so I have to keep my LinkedIn sort of vanilla, and I have to keep the site. We Because of that, we didn't put many faces on our site. That said, we're
mhm.
kind of in a new phase. I'm not on as many of those calls directly anymore, but our website hasn't been. Our website still looks anonymous,
Mm.
so we need to change that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, when we just kind of redevelop our current web platform,
Yeah,
and in creating the videos, we kind of foreseed what you're describing. So what we end up doing was, because I'm kind of like the face of the company, then we created myself as an avatar, cloned my voice.
yeah,
So then all of our videos start off with like a 15-second intro from SA Grant, and then it goes into the AI avatars after that. So again, I'm trying to bridge the gap based upon what you're saying to kind of give a face and a name that people are accustomed to, but at the same time, as an individual, we don't have only 24 hours in a day. It's going to be impossible for us to create that many videos at scale on demand without leveraging AI in today's world.
absolutely. And we're doing exactly that
Mm,
right now, by the way, too. So even when I say, yeah, I'm going to try to put our faces to it,
yeah.
like you said, just because of scalability, like that's the last thing I have is like 2 or 3 hours a week to add to doing like a video blog or something like that. So
Yep.
it'll be the robot me.
Hey man, I love it. I mean, I always say, what a hell of a time to be alive. Because I mean, considering that if we went back to like the '90s or the early 2000s, we could not even concept or conceive we would be where we are that quickly. Considering it was just the dawn of Google, the dawn of Facebook, and the dawn of iPhones.
Yeah, exactly. It's an amazing, when I was at Time Warner, CNN was starting to close some of
Mhm,
their news their affiliates.
mhm,
Basically, it just became not economically viable to have somebody
mhm.
sitting in a news office in Australia just in case a news story were to happen, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Australia is probably a bad example because it probably is worth it, but whatever, you get the idea.
Yeah.
And that was right at the time where it was like, hey, I bet people could upload like their own videos and we could start like incentivizing people to take their own videos of stuff.
Mhm,
And so just that idea, that of course that ended up becoming what CNN's I reporter. But that idea to go from, hey, I bet, I wonder if people would upload a video to where we are today, where like that's like a core part of what almost everybody's day at some point
mhm.
um, involves. Yeah, it's just sort of an amazing time to be alive.
Yeah, definitely. So going into like one of my final questions for you, and this question, I think, obviously we didn't even get into the opportunity to talk about like your fate and like your world religious certificate that you're getting and all that. So this may be an opportunity
Yeah.
for you to dial in on that. If you had an opportunity to meet with anyone, and I mean anyone, it could have been from the first person that walked on the planet of the earth, or someone that's, a tech junkie like yourself, someone that you've met, never met, someone that has died in the past. If you could spend 24 hours with this individual, who would that individual be and why?
So it's a great question. I feel like I know what I probably should say, but I would probably like I'll give a somewhat unique answer. I think Milton Hershey would be probably my go-to hang because he seemed like a very, at least the autobiographies and things I've read about him, seems like a very moral person, seems like a very good person, and seemed like the kind of business owner that I strive to be like,
Mm,
where he truly built, I mean, the reason there's a theme park, Hershey Park and all those other things is because he wanted his employees to be able to do
mm,
fun stuff, not just live to work and those things. So the he bought a big part of Cuba and tried to reform Cuba before, this was of course long before Cuba was taken over and things. But anyway, he's somebody who I feel like would cover a lot of bases. We could
mm,
talk about business, we could talk about faith, we could talk about a lot of different things.
mm,
He's my pick, Milton Hershey.
mm. I think it's interesting that you went that route because I mean, parallel to him, roughly around the same give or take time, Disney kind of falls into that
Yeah.
category as well. And I don't know if Disney, if he was around, if he would be content being that there's such a monopoly at this point in media, or would he kind of retrospectively look back and be like, I had no comprehension that it was even going to go in that direction. So I mean, to your point about Hershey, at least Hershey kind of stayed within the spectrum of chocolate,
Yeah.
like pound for pound. But when you say Disney, it's kind of like your point earlier about travel. Is it a travel cruise? Is it the theme park? Is it,
Right.
like a movie? Like, is it Star Wars? Like they own so much at this point. It's kind of like unconceivable to even comprehend that back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. I thought about choosing Walt because I'm a huge
Mhm,
Walt fan, and I wasn't. I'd actually like sort of put off. I knew he enjoyed going to the parks as a family and all that stuff,
mhm,
but I'd put off sort of reading anything about him or doing much deep diving into him. Um, but then it turns out he and I share a birthday. I have a lot of similarities. His relationship with his family and his dad and stuff very much mirrors mine, and so there was a lot of similarity. Sorry, my it's my alarm for my next appointment, but the but there was so I definitely would he's definitely on the list of
mhm,
folks, but the only reason I chose Hershey over him is because
mhm,
Walt, I feel like, kind of similar to me, is a very, because of that, I think he also had a somewhat addictive personality, um which is, I mean, why he only lived to be 60 something, but the where he's constantly chasing some new idea.
mhm,
It's like he builds an animation studio that's very successful, making shorts. It's like,
mhm.
no, I want to make long feature films, and then makes long feature films, and then it's like, yeah, but I want to, and that's cool that I've got this animation thing. I want to make live action films and have an actual like movie studio. And then it's like, all right, well, then I want a TV studio. And then it's like he constantly is chasing that like next. He was addicted to building.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I think probably all the conversations would be whatever whatever his current thing is. But,
Mm,
I don't know that he was ever like I don't know that he was as rounded of a person as and I say that being, I feel like I'm probably the same way where like
mm.
I'm probably going to talk 99% about whatever my current like obsession is.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I mean, that definitely makes sense. Makes sense. So, I mean, with that, going into closing, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to then become the host of the Boss Cage podcast. My show is now your show, and I'm now your guest. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, what's the best part of having the podcast that you weren't expecting?
I think it was an opportunity from the networking aspect because again, like doing this much due diligence and having these conversations, and even though this is the first time that you and I've had opportunity to meet, if we were to ever meet in person, like the kind of like what you said earlier with your wife, like the formalities of that relationship has been formed in this 1 hour versus seeing someone in passing for a long period of time. So I think
Right.
that was the real bonus that I didn't expect was the itemization of the networking aspect of it.
Awesome. Awesome. And what's your goal? What's your plan to next this thing, or do you want to keep it where it is? What's your long-term goal with this?
Kind of like what you said about Disneying it to yourself. I mean, obviously, I'm a builder and I have my own addictions as well. And
Yeah,
so the next step, literally within the next 30 days, and it's the reason why people that are looking at this video right now, my backdrop is completely different. I'm not in the studio that I've had for so long in this show, is that we're getting ready to move overseas to Amsterdam in the middle of next month.
nice.
So just having that opportunity, the podcast is international already, but I always say that it's international until you really go international, until you really step in someone else's soil and build what you build in the US and try to build it abroad. That's my next goal. And as far as doing that, obviously everything that we're doing with this podcast is education driven. So it's going to give me opportunity to spread the education palette more so from one continent to a global footprint.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you. Thank you, man. I'm excited to be a part of it, and congratulations on the move.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it, man. I think you definitely brought a lot to the table today. I think you and I could probably definitely do an even deeper dive and get a little bit more techie and more nerdy, but I think it was a well-rounded episode, and I definitely appreciate you being here today.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Great. SA Grant, over and out.